Well, are the Jets going to figure out the Kyle Connor question before the start of the season? It doesn't seem so, and let's chat about the implications of that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, we have a couple of things to chat. First off, just wanted to say sorry that we were a little quiet this week. I was going to try and record on the road in LA, but as it turns out, pretty hard to record around a lot of noisy people. So wanted to give you the best listening experience, and we are back and ready for really the start of the season. I don't know if you have really thought about it too much because obviously it's the summer. It's almost the end of August, and you're probably focused more on other things. We've got Bombers, football, and stuff. The NFL and MLB are either, for the MLB almost at the end of the season, or for the NFL about to roll it right back up. So hockey at first seems a little bit distant, but guess what? We're about a month and a half away from the start of the season. And with the Jets having the prospect showdown in just a couple of weeks, hockey really is almost back. It's coming. It's going to be a lot sooner than you think. And October will be here before you know it. So a lot to talk about heading into the season, including the Kyle Connor contract stalemate that we appear to be in. And I also wanted to continue a little bit of our series, the Where Are They At Now? We last left off with like 15-16's team, and I wanted to check in on the 16-17 squad. Before we do all of that, though, did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app because you can get an amazing offer as football season is right around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your future bets right now. Now, I mentioned earlier about the Kyle Connor contract thing, and I think we've kind of hit an interesting spot. Now, look, full disclaimer that when, this information sort of broke from Frank Saravalli, I don't think anyone is necessarily reading into this as a very definitive statement, and certainly nothing to be panicked about. But it does kind of feel like Kyle Connor's camp is essentially putting us on hold right now, which for the Jets is not really a good spot to be in. It's not the worst thing ever, and I don't think it's a situation where everyone's hitting red alarm immediately. But if this continues into the start of the season in October, and we don't know what's going to happen with Connor at that point, I think you start sweating a little bit. I think this is one of those situations where, Connor's camp doesn't really have that much incentive to figure it out right now. They just want to sort of play the waiting game. They can try and maximize his contract return. So he really does have a lot of the cards in his hand. And for the Jets, that's not really a comfortable spot to be in. Now, look, no one's going to sit here and say that the Jets can't sort this out and that, they don't eventually reach a contract agreement. I would actually say it's fairly confident in my mind that they do. And I would actually put this, again, I probably mentioned this before on another episode. I'm at 90 to 95% sure the Jets do re-sign Connor. But there's this lingering 5% where you start to wonder, okay, if it doesn't happen, what do the Jets do? Because they're not going to trade him for futures. They need guys who can kind of help in the immediate present. The cup window is in this 3-year so-called window, which I just, if that's the case, then all right, you need to make some corresponding moves. And we really haven't seen a lot of that even before the contract situation started to become a question. You look at the Jets roster and what they've done this offseason, and honestly, it's not really been a lot. They've signed a lot of older, slower veterans and depth pieces, but not really anyone who particularly moves the needle. And so I look at this contract thing with Connor, And I'm starting to wonder what exactly the expectation for the season is. If they can't resolve this question before the start of the year, do you feel okay with rolling this all the way to, free agency? How is this going to play out? And so it's a real interesting thing for me. There's quite a few ways this could end up. Again, most likely door number one is going to be a long-term contract extension, 5 or 6 years, probably, 12 and a half million. I don't really see that being particularly shocking as an outcome. I think it's the most likely door. But if it doesn't end up being that, say we start talking about the 5% chance that he doesn't, where do you go from there? The last time the Jets went through this, which was with Ehlers last year, they let him walk to free agency because, look, you were a President's Trophy team. You thought you really had a shot at the playoffs, and so you plan to use him as an internal rental, which I think is a very sensible decision. If you were going to trade him, you probably needed to do it earlier, and the Jets just sort of committed to this whole thing that they were going to play it out, try and win with him while he was still on the team, and then hope that they could maybe convince him to stay in the intervening offseason. But obviously that didn't happen, right? He's a Kane. It's over. And so I don't know that the Jets can really afford to do that again with Connor. KSC still has some considerable trade value and market interest. And if you think about the kinds of teams out there that need his skill set, it's most of the league. I think everyone would probably kill to have a guy who is seen as a super accomplished, super skilled, top 10 kind of player in the league. And, I don't know that that's necessarily as high as people value him. Certainly among goal scorers, he's up there, but, top 10, that's a pretty lofty thing. You're not talking at the most elite level, but he is like a really good player who's going to be paid a lot of money. I look at him kind of more in that like Marner-ish tier of player. So, if we're in that range, there's considerable interest, and I think that there will be considerable trade interest as well. But other teams will also know that the Jets would be pinned, with their backs against the wall, and it could be a really difficult situation. So, I think the Jets just kind of need to figure this out before the start of the year, if possible. If they can't, another year where you're rolling down Connor's contract into the final days is going to be rough, man. That's really an axe just waiting to fall, and I don't think Winnipeg wants to be on the receiving end. Again, I don't think this is quite as clear as that situation with Ehlers, where it was very telegraphed that he was going to be leaving. I know that some of you were not thrilled that I kept saying that, and you were asking me where that was coming from, and it's like, well, just got to use a little bit of common sense, right? He hadn't been played in a prime role. He probably wanted to be a top liner. And, that sort of was reflected in what he said when he left. He needed a change of scenery, a change of pace, and to give himself a new challenge. I think that was a very gentle way of saying he didn't quite feel that he was valued the same way that he saw himself in the Jets org. So, it is what it is. KFC is not going to have that same sort of situation, though. KFC knows that he's loved. He knows that he gets top billing, and all of his friends are here. So on a personal level, I think that there would be incentives to stay, and I certainly think the Jets would want to pay up. But if he does decide that he wants to leave, things get tricky very quickly. Suddenly that 3-year window becomes very up in the air, because at that point, your whole future as a Jets org is kind of up for grabs. You could go in any direction you wanted. But we know which direction the Jets do want to go, and that's to continue on with KFC and keep this core together. Whether it's the best choice or not, I don't really know. I couldn't tell you. I have my own thoughts on sort of the cap of this team's ability, more so in the playoffs than the regular season. So we'll have to see, right? This is a really big situation. I've told you before, it is like one of the most important choices the Jets have ever made. And if KFC is the one sitting in the driver's seat here, all we can hope for is that they arrive at a conclusion that makes sense for everyone, right? You just don't want to have to go into the start of October running down yet another internal rental year without some sort of clarity as to which direction we're going. So going to be a fun one, so buckle up. The start of the season really is in a month and a half. We still have to figure this contract out. It is a very, very big guillotine. It does feel a little bit like right now, even if, the likelihood is he does resign. So, with the future up in the air, let's continue to look back at the past. It's a little bit of a fun time. Always good to sort of reconnect with your roots And with the Jets, the 2016-2017 team, it was rough, right? We all remember that it didn't exactly go according to plan, but there were some really fun players from this squad. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the guys that are either still active in the NHL or maybe have stepped away from the game in the past couple of years and reflect on a few forwards and defensemen from that time. Before we do, though, did want to talk about our friends and partners a little bit more at FanDuel. August 26th is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fanatics and fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week one even kicks off, this is your moment. Now, look, the MVP race this year, it's got to be Lamar. It's got to be probably another year where you have Josh Allen in that running. Maybe we see, a guy elsewhere. Maybe, Shadur has a crazy season. But if you're looking for maybe a more surefire bet for a team champion, maybe we're looking at the Ravens, right? I've got to, back my team and my city, but maybe you think that this is a year where you have a bold hot shot at the Minnesota Vikings. Well, the only way that you can make the most off of this and win big is by visiting the FanDuel app today and start planning your future bets right now. Future Days is just one day and one day only. So get into FanDuel, play your game, and win big with NFL Futures Day. Hey friends, welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on this episode as we are following up our chat about Kyle Connor and the future of the Jets by looking more at the past, right? The Jets have had many interesting years. 16-17 was obviously a bit of a tougher season for Winnipeg. We had a couple of really standout performances that season from guys like Scheifele, and then eventually we found the whole Line draft and everything. So there was certainly, some positive outcomes after that rough year. But, we have a few players that have moved on since then. And I thought it'd be fun to see how some of the guys are doing. Maybe some of them are still active. Maybe some of them are, at this point over with their careers. And one guy that we always loved here on the show, and certainly I loved as a fan, was Matthew Perreault. And everyone remembers Perreault. He always had the craziest mustaches. And he spent a good portion of his NHL career with the Jets. He arrived here as a free agent out of Anaheim, and quite frankly, was just one of the best free agent signings the Jets have ever made, right? We're all hoping the Taves thing really turns out and that he becomes that next player. But I think right off the bat, Perreault was one of those guys who was such a criminally underrated skill player that really improved so many lines as a guy who was like this elite middle six, versatile, multi-tool sort of player. Unfortunately, he did get hurt a lot, and so I think that tended to tarnish the memory of what he was able to do for a lot of people. But in terms of the player and really what he brought, Perreault was such a versatile, do-it-all sort of attacking presence. And, he was a real prick in the corners, man. You know how Cole Perfetti kind of talks about being a pest and a bit of a prick himself? Perreault was that guy before them. And, his career with the Jets was one where, kind of like Ehlers, I don't think he really got the recognition for being the sort of skill player that he was. And for the amount that he would play and what he would do, he put up some really nice numbers. And his underlying numbers were always really strong. Just a very fun, creative type. He is actually retired as of a couple of years ago. He spent his last season playing just a few games for the Montreal Canadiens, and then he hung the skates up, right? I don't know if he's been doing like finance work or anything like that. That's usually the industry a lot of these guys go into, business, finance, all that. But he certainly made enough to where I would imagine he could just retire a little bit and spend time with his family. We all saw the family photos. They were adorable. Perreault seems to be doing pretty well for himself. So glad that retirement has been kind to him the last several years. Another former Jets forward who appears to have suspended operations since his time with Winnipeg is Sean Matthias. I actually had forgotten Sean had a few years with the Jets. He really didn't play for Winnipeg much, just about, 65, 70 games, if I recall correctly. Not a lot, right? But, he was one of those bottom six players that Maurice had a bit of a soft spot for. They brought him in. I don't really remember a lot of his games other than that, he was there. He was like a third or fourth line guy, did some stuff. I feel like his Toronto and Vancouver days, and even really the Panthers days, were a lot more successful. That's where you saw some of his best work, especially in sort of a bottom six rotational role. Especially the Panthers days, he was a pretty nice fourth line guy, chipped in more than a fair few points given his bottom six role, and was just a really hardworking, industrious player. After the 17-18 season, apparently he hung it up. I haven't really been able to find a lot about where his official retirement was. I feel like I saw it several years ago, and it just sort of flew, by my radar. But I don't know if he ever got a job within an NHL org. There's really not been a lot since his time off. So whatever he's up to, hope he's doing well. If he went back into maybe the world of business or maybe is just kind of chilling with his family, hope that things are all good. Obviously, when he left the league at the time, it was like 17-18. So it's been quite a few years since he was last around the Jets org and another team. So hope that time has been kind to him and that, he's enjoying retirement as much as one can. That's where the inactive NHLers and players end. I want to talk about a couple of guys who are still actually kicking it. And one of them is Andrew Copp, who's with the Detroit Red Wings. Now, that may change sometime in the next couple of seasons. Obviously his contract is slowly winding down, and I think, Yzerman probably wants to move his salary at some point. It'd be very funny if he ended up back in Winnipeg one day. The end of his relationship with the Jets didn't exactly go down super well, and I feel like we really got the best of his career before he ended up leaving and getting traded to the Rangers. New York got a lot out of him as like a middle six and even like at times top six option for, the rental that he was. And then, signed a huge, 5-year deal with the Red Wings. And I think a lot of us knew that it was probably a little bit of an overpayment. The Andrew Copp that we all fondly remember wasn't quite that player when he got to Detroit, but he's still been a really solid middle six guy and somebody that I think, continues to wear an A for the team. He's been a nice secondary leader behind Larkin and really just a vet presence who brings a lot of experience. I always remember him in Winnipeg as being one of the most underappreciated middle six guys out there. Somebody who might have actually had legitimate second line ability and could have been something really special for the Jets had the relationship not soured and his own game started to slow down right before he left. But he's been getting the bag, man. Detroit's been paying him a lot of money. He's been doing pretty okay for them. Although you look at some of the underlying numbers and maybe not as good as they used to be. Some of the defensive work has definitely started to slide a bit, but he's still doing well, it seems. And I just envision a year where, Yzerman's got to move his salary for something. He comes back to Winnipeg basically for nothing. And maybe he retires a Jet, right? I think that would be pretty cool if he comes back home and finishes his final season as a Winnipeg player. He still has some time left. I don't think he's going to retire next year or anything like that. But, the 30s are beckoning. And as you start to slow down, maybe he wants to focus on off the ice stuff and maybe hang it up after, 34, 35. That's about the age a lot of these guys start to consider their future. So he's got a few years left. We'll see where he goes. But if he ends up back in Winnipeg one day to retire as a Winnipeg Jet, that would be not too bad at all. Last guy that I thought would be fun to take a look at is a name that used to be so controversial. Nick Petan has been all over the world, apparently, the last couple of years. He spent a lot of time after leaving Winnipeg with the Toronto org, and then after that ended up moving to the Vancouver system and then Minnesota system for a couple of years. He's been doing really, really well in the AHL tier, and I honestly think that there was a version of Petan that could have been a real full-time NHLer, and just I don't know what it was with him that never really translated at the NHL level, but he's a very skilled player who I think as a bottom six guy was elite, right? Like defensively, very robust, forced a lot of turnovers and stuff in ways that I don't think people really appreciated, and did some puck shielding, but in terms of his AHL performance, did really well, and then had a really good stint in the KHL last year. This year, he's moved on to Switzerland, so we'll see how he does there. I still think that there's a player in there that could become, a decent guy for some NHL team, but we all know how it is. players like him, get shifted around a lot and move abroad a lot. So not super surprising that, a 5'9" dude who doesn't get seen as really physical didn't really get the kind of shot that I think a lot of people maybe wanted him to. But, he's carved out a nice, successful pro career all the same, even if it hasn't always led to a lot of NHL time. I'll tell you what, man, he has had a long career for a guy who, again, was seen as undersized and not really the strongest or most physical type. The fact that he's still playing shows you that somebody out there recognizes he's got some real chops to be a good pro. And it seems like he has rewarded those organizations with, even as recently as the last couple of years, 40, 50, even 60-point AHL seasons. So glad to see him still shining. His KHL performance seemed to be pretty darn good. And now he'll get a chance to go to Switzerland, which is just a very, very cool country. And I hope he has fun out that way. We've talked a lot about those forwards. So before we close out for tonight, I did want to shout out some of the defensemen and see how they're doing. Before we do, though, did want to give out a friendly reminder about why you should make Gametime your ticket purchasing service of choice. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Gametime comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without all the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, and merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Gametime makes it fast and affordable. All prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch, and you've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, cheap zone prices, and of course a lowest price guarantee that always takes the worry out of buying. Gametime is the official ticketing partner of Locked On MLB, and I've actually used it myself when I was picking up Ravens playoff tickets a couple years ago. I got a panoramic seat view, and I always got confirmation that I had the lowest price and all fees were upfront, right? No hidden fees, no hidden charges. Exactly what you see is what you pay for. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app and create an account and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Folks, just wanted to wrap up real quick with some final reflections on some players from past teams, and we focused on the 16-17 squad tonight. Last guys I wanted to shout out were Brian Strait and Nelson Nogier on the defensive side. Nogier is actually still doing some stuff, but Strait actually ended up hanging it up a couple of years ago. He spent his final seasons with the Binghamton Devils, really just the Devils org, and didn't actually play a lot. Didn't end up playing much of anything in the very final season of his career. I think at that point, he was probably getting close to hanging it up anyways. Strait was, in his mid-30s at that point. And, time hadn't exactly been super kind to him, but he had carved out a pretty successful role as like a third pairing defender for much of his career. So glad that he ended up getting to spend some time and close out his career, kind of closer to home. He, has always been sort of a guy on the Northeast side of things, ended up, being from Massachusetts. And so playing in Binghamton was a little closer to home, relatively speaking. Got to finish his NHL and AHL career and finally hung up the boots after the 1920 season. Fair enough, right? Guys like him sometimes don't always get jobs late in their career. So when you can kind of hang up the skates and do what you want and end on your own terms, I think that's the most important thing. I actually thought I recall him getting a job somewhere as like a player development coach or something. I don't recall exactly where that was, but I do think he stayed somewhere and somehow involved in the scene just a bit, even if it's not right now. Nelson Nogier, on the other hand, he's actually still kicking it. He's been playing the past couple of years overseas. A guy of his age, when he left Winnipeg's system in 22, obviously he still was, in his mid-20s and had some real stuff to give. He ended up having a little bit of a stint at the end of his Jets tenure with the Ontario Reign. And then last couple of years, he's been bouncing between the KHL, DEL, and apparently this year he is moving on to Austria. So he is collecting those passport stamps. And look, I always say that like European hockey is just really cool. I know a lot of you probably haven't seen any of it because it's just not really broadcast over here, but if you ever get the chance, check out some highlights and clips. I always say the Champions Hockey League is really fun to watch, but in general, just like European hockey is such a unique experience, and I hope that Noje has really been enjoying it. You get to play in some very interesting places. He was with Barris Astana. But last year he was with the Straubing Tigers. This year he'll be with the Vienna Capitals. Let me tell you, man, living in Vienna has to be pretty darn cool. One of the cultural, historical centers of the world. And here you are playing hockey for their team, getting to rep their colors, and really get the full European experience as a Canadian. So cool to see him still do well. I know Noje was a bit of a fan favorite for a lot of Jets fans. He even spent a couple of cups of coffee with the Winnipeg Big Club. Didn't really work out in terms of his NHL career, but the fact that he's still playing shows that he still had some real chops to be a quality pro overseas. This European route I always think is fun, and for a guy who's starting to get closer to 30, as you get older and can really appreciate some of these unique cultural experiences and stuff, getting to go overseas and play there has to be cool. I mean, yes, it is away from home, and maybe it's a little bit tough in that respect, but I hope that, his time overseas has been fruitful, that he's gotten to really enjoy it, and that he continues getting some pro contracts out there, because living out there has to be pretty dang cool, especially once you can appreciate it more and get out and do stuff after games. So glad to see he's still thriving and doing well, and wish Noje the best on the rest of his career. For tonight's episode, that is also for where we're actually going to park it for now. Tomorrow, we'll be back with the 17-18 squad and some reflections there. And then, throughout the rest of the week, as we start getting closer to maybe the 1920 or 2021 season, which will be our last one, we will start to talk a little bit more about the upcoming prospects showdown and what to expect from the Jets this year. We've talked a little bit about it on and off, but as it starts to become a little bit clearer as to what the Jets' plan is for the season, I think we can start to get a little bit more of a clearer sense of just how good or bad they're going to be this season, which I still see them as a playoff team, but maybe they're going to have some issues in the actual postseason itself. We'll chat about that all throughout the rest of the weekend and the upcoming weeks, but for tonight's episode, that's going to be all the time that we have. I thank you for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow, so have a great night, and as always, go Jets go.